Good morning. Today we're going to talk about JavaScript, or we're going to talk about scope, we're going to talk about functions, and we're going to talk about IIFEs and namespaces, all sorts of interesting and related topics. So let's talk about scope, and let's talk about variables. When you create a variable in JavaScript, like var a equals 7, what this does is create what is called a global variable, which means this variable is usable by every JavaScript file ever that is attached to this page. This is occasionally good, this is usually bad, and so that's why we're having this discussion. So when we say something is global, what we mean in the context of JavaScript and in the context of a web page is that it gets attached to the window. So if I save this file and then I open this up in Chrome and refresh, I can say window.a, and there's my variable a, which has the value 7. So just by creating that variable, what I've done is I've put it in the window, which is not necessarily a problem, but it can be a problem if multiple people try to put a variable called a in the window. So to avoid all this kind of stuff, we want to come up with some better patterns. And sometimes it's just kind of annoying, sometimes it's just kind of messy, sometimes it can actually have very bad side effects. So let's say, for example, you like using the alert function. I don't like using the alert function, but if you do, there it is. You can use the alert, pass in a string, and voila, we get an alert in the page. We can actually break that really easily, which may be a welcome side effect if you don't like it. But if you do, well, it's bad. So let's create a function called alert, and this function does a console log. So if we create this function here, and then we go back and reload our page, we've actually broken the built-in browser functionality. So now if I type in alert hello expecting to get an alert, I don't get it. What I've done is I've replaced what the browser has for alert. And this applies to a lot of things in the browser. You can overwrite things, you can change things, and this also means you can change people's code. If you're using jQuery, you could accidentally break jQuery if you start changing the dollar sign or adding things to it. And so this kind of approach is dangerous. It's easy for people to get into because this is sort of the natural way of doing JavaScript, but we want to be slightly unnatural. We want to have some patterns to improve things. So let's talk about the most basic way of solving this problem. We look at our function. Let's create another one so that we're not breaking something in the browser. So if we create a variable called a here, as we discussed, you can see that in the window object itself. If we create a function, okay, we can call it whatever because I'm just going to try to prove a point. If I create a variable called b in the whatever function, because it's in a function, we will not be able to see that in the window object. So if I refresh the page, I can say window.a. I can even see window.whatever, the name of my function. But I can't actually get to that variable inside. There is no window.b. There is no window.whatever.b. It is effectively hidden from me. I cannot get to it. That's good. And also, this means I'm not changing anything on the window object. So the most basic way of controlling scope and not accidentally stepping on other people's toes is to use functions in JavaScript. So that's easy enough. One thing that is interesting, though, is even though we have a function and the variable b is hidden, it is inaccessible, it's not in the window object, it's not in the global scope. Even though that's true, the function whatever can use the variable a. And so if we were to add a console log here, go refresh the page and call whatever, and that 7 there is from the variable a. And so you can look at functions as one-way mirrors. If you're in a function, you can look out of the function to see variables. But if you're outside the function, you cannot look inside the function. This also applies to any parameters. So if I have a parameter c, and then I go in here and I pass in a value here into parameter c, I cannot get to c. C does not exist on the window. I cannot get to C on the function. It's just completely inaccessible to me. So any parameters into the function, any variables created within the function, those are inaccessible to me, which is good. That means they're not affecting the window object. That means I can't accidentally break my own code or anyone else's code or the browser's code. All of that is sort of protected. So if we want to take this idea, how can we use this to really solve almost all of our problems with scope? And the answer to that is to use what is called the IIFE. IIFE, I-I-F-E, stands for immediately invoked function expression. All right, that's an IIFE. I'm going to comment that out so that it doesn't give us a JavaScript error. The IIFE pattern uses functions to hide variables, and essentially the idea is you declare a function and then you immediately call it so that any variables inside are hidden from the outside. So this is how I do it. There's slight variations on this, but this is how I do it. So I create an expression, that's these two parentheses on the outside, and a function inside of it. So at this point, I have a function inside of an expression and I immediately invoke it. So what this does is this essentially runs this function expression, and anything created within here, because it's in a function, will be inaccessible to the outside world. So let's recreate our scenario before. Let's reload our page. So we have access to A, we do not have access to B. Okay? So that's good. And at this point, we can basically put all of our JavaScript. And so that's exactly how I get started. I create an IIFE, and then I start writing my JavaScript. So if I create our whatever function again, console.log a, and then if I call the whatever function, I can see the value of a. Now we have a new advantage, where before we were able to call the function whatever. Now I can't even get to it. Even the function itself, not just the variables inside of it. Even the function itself is completely unavailable to anyone else. No one can see it. I can't see it. I can't break anyone else with my whatever function. If someone else had a whatever function, I wouldn't be breaking theirs. And so by wrapping everything in the IIFE, I essentially sandbox myself so that I cannot step on anyone else's functions or variable names, and they cannot step on mine. This is super duper handy. Now, in the case where you actually want people to call your code, or in the case where someone else wants someone to call their code, if you surround everything in an IIFE, you're going to have to do something then to expose it. And the general pattern for doing this is something called namespacing. It's something common in other languages. It doesn't really exist natively in JavaScript, but we sort of mimic it by using JavaScript objects. So I'm going to go up here to the top, and I'm going to create a namespace, essentially. I'm going to create on the window an object and use that as my namespace. And so I'm going to name this JavaScript application I'm making Cool App. And so now if I look here in the window and refresh, I can say window.coolapp. All right. I can get access to that, which makes sense. It's outside the IIFE, and I am explicitly attaching this object to the window object. So it's accessible. So how would I use this in the context of my IIFE? Well, because functions are one-way mirrors, I could just go in here and do something like window.coolapp and mess around with it. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to follow a different pattern. What I'm going to do is I'm essentially going to inject any of my dependencies, as you might call it in some cases. I'm going to inject anything that I need into the function as a parameter. And so I'm going to call it context. And I'm going to pass in window.coolapp. So window.coolapp, this ultimately gets mapped to that right there. And so whenever this executes, context is in fact this object that I created on the window. So why is that useful? Well, let's just say you have a function in here called start. Okay, and I have my whatever function. So I have two functions in here. And I want somebody to be able to start off all of my code. Okay, so how would I do that? Well, I've kind of hidden all of this code in the IIFE. No one can access it. By following this pattern, I can expose individual pieces of my code without exposing everything. So let's say I want the whatever function to be called by the start function. All right, but I only want people to be able to call the start function. I can do this. I can say context, which is this cool app object. I can say context start equals start. In this case, start is this function, and I'm creating a property on the object context and assigning that start function to that property. It just happens to have the same name. I could name it whatever I want, but it happens to have the same name. And so here I'm now exposing this start function to the world. And so if I go back and look at my window, I can say window.coolapp, and I can see, if I open that up, that I have a start function, but I do not have a whatever function. This is really awesome because I can create whatever variables I want to here. I can create a variable called puppy names, which has an array of puppy names like Fido, Rover, whatever. I can create this. I can go up here. I can refresh. I can say window.coolapp. And that is completely hidden to the world, which means I can't break anyone else's puppy array. Who wants their puppy array broken? I can't break anyone else's. They can't break mine. It is impossible for them to touch this code. This is why we use the IIFE. And we use namespacing to expose our code, expose our functions and variable names to everyone in the outside world. So that's the basic idea of namespaces. And what I do with my students is actually like this pattern of the start function. And the reason why I like this pattern is it gives them a place to start thinking, which is where does the functionality of the JavaScript of the page start? Well, it starts in the start function. So if we go to the page and we add a variable, if we add a DOM element to the page called hello to IIFEs. All right, so we've added this DOM element to the page, and here's my script tag that I brought in. I have jQuery. We'll use jQuery just for fun. So I've got this paragraph in the page, and I tell them, okay, student, I want you to change the text in the paragraph whenever your code starts. So I could do something like this and get rid of my extraneous code. I don't actually need puppy names and whatever and all that. Okay, so I've got a start function, so I can say grab the paragraph. There's only one, so this will work just fine. I can change the text to whatever I want it to say. Refresh the page. All right, nothing's happened. Why has nothing happened? Well, I actually haven't started my code. So I can say window.coolApp start, which I can do because the start function is exposed through coolApp. So I can say start, and look, it's changed. And so as you look at the JavaScript, you have a place to start reasoning. Where's my logic starting? I can go start, it starts here, and this is what's happening here. So that's not necessary. That's not a part of the IIFE. In fact, if I were to just put some JavaScript here to execute some DOM queries or jQueries to get elements and start changing them, I could. But my typical pattern is to have a start function to give someone a place to start reasoning about the logic, and I expose it through the context. That's just my general pattern. All right, so that's all I wanted to show today. I hope you find it useful. IIFEs are great. They're very useful in JavaScript. They're not a necessary pattern, but for any reasonable sized application, they're a very important pattern. So we'll talk about namespacing more next time. I want to talk about why this is good but not great. There's a better way of doing this, a better way of handling multiple files, because this is going to cause us an issue potentially if we have multiple JavaScript files. So we're going to talk about that in the next video. Until then, enjoy your JavaScript time.